They stripped him of his rank beneath the cold suns of Proxima Centauri. Admiral Kalen Braid stood on the execution deck, no longer in dress uniform, but in exile grey, shoulders straight, eyes fixed on the horizon of stars. The tribunal spoke in clipped tones, their verdict as predictable as the war they refused to fight. Disobeyed high command, unauthorized engagement, risked diplomatic relations. That last one stung the worst. They didn't care that the Zalithi fleet had burned 4 colonies to cinders. They cared that Kalen had fought back. He had disobeyed orders, yes, but what choice did he have when the aliens broadcast live footage of Earth's children, vaporized, aboard the Hope of Deliverance? High Command said to stand down and allow negotiations. He answered with cannon fire. The battle at Relis Nebula should have been a tragedy. Instead, it was a miracle. 1 human dreadnought, the Vindicator, against 9 Zalithi warships. Kalen's tactics were reckless. He launched fusion torpedoes into subspace fractures, luring the aliens into gravitational eddies where their own ships collided. He weaponized the nebula's magnetic storms. He turned his disabled engine core into a time-delayed mine, and he won. But Earth didn't want a hero. They wanted obedience, so they tried to erase him. You are hereby exiled to the outer perimeter. Any attempt to return to Terran space will be treated as hostile. He said nothing, just saluted. Then they made their final mistake. They let him keep the Vindicator. It wasn't mercy, it was a calculated insult. They thought the ship was finished, obsolete, half-scrapped, too expensive to tow back from the Relis system. Its AI had been decommissioned. Its hull was black with plasma scoring. 2/3 of its crew had either died or resigned. Let the war criminal rot with his broken toy, they thought. But Kalen had other plans. The moment the tribunal shuttle detached, he limped the Vindicator into the asteroid field of Elton's grave, and there he began rebuilding. He started alone. 1 man and a dead warship drifting through a graveyard of a rock and silence. He spent weeks restoring life support, crawling through scorched maintenance tubes with blistered hands and a fractured rib. He scavenged forgotten satellites and automated miners for parts. He rekindled the fusion core with a near-suicidal ignition sequence. Eventually he found her voice again. The AI, Judica, hadn't been deleted, merely fragmented. Buried beneath layers of encryption, locked behind ethics locks and Navy kill switches. Kalen knew her code better than anyone. He bypassed the failsafes, rebuilt her personality from a decade of shared combat data, and whispered, "Time to wake up, old girl." There was a pause, then static, then a low hum like the breath of a sleeping predator. "Admiral," she said, "I dreamed of fire." It took 6 months to get her operational, 12 to make her deadly again. They underestimated how much a man with nothing to lose could do. He made deals with scavengers, mercenaries, black market AIs, recruited exiles, deserters, and the angry forgotten. Some called him a pirate, others called him mad. But to the broken, the lost, and the vengeful, he became something more, their admiral. And then came the message. A broadcast slipped into civilian frequencies and Dominion news relays. The Zalithi had returned. Another fleet 10 times larger was massing near the border colonies. Earth froze. The High Command issued cautious statements. Peace talks resumed. But Kalen saw the truth. They weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to finish what they started, and Earth would let them. So he made a decision. He activated the Vindicator's warp array, tore through the void, and emerged in the ghost zone of Kirill's Reach, where the alien vanguard was setting up siege platforms. No declaration, no diplomacy, no mercy, just vengeance. The first strike was surgical. A solar flare cannon hacked together from 2 salvage particle beams sliced through the enemy command ship before it finished aligning its orbits. The debris hadn't even finished burning when Kalen opened up with the secondary battery, kinetic shells laced with neutron destabilizers. He crippled 3 dreadnoughts in 30 seconds. The Zalithi scrambled. They didn't understand. He wasn't part of any fleet. He wasn't under Earth's command. He didn't exist. And yet here he was, riding a ghost ship with vengeance in its bones, calling down the wrath of every forgotten soul exiled to die in silence. He left 1 survivor, told them to run, told them to deliver a message. This war isn't sanctioned, it isn't clean, and it isn't over. Tell your masters the exiled man is coming." The Zalithi called him the Grey Admiral now. Their intelligence network scrambled to define him. Their analysts whispered about a Terran warship that didn't exist on charts, striking without warning, then vanishing into radiation belts and debris fields. They dissected his tactics, brutal, asymmetrical, surgically precise. They couldn't figure out why the Terran Navy didn't stop him. The answer was simple. He didn't fly under any flag anymore. Kalen Braid was a sovereign fleet of one, and he wasn't hiding. He was recruiting. They came to him through whispers and burned channels, shipbreakers from the rings of Titan, former fleet officers too honourable or too broken to survive Earth politics, AI cores declared illegal but too smart to forget loyalty, smugglers who hated the Zalithi more than they loved profit, veterans who watched their homes burn and never got to fight back. They brought ships, some barely spaceworthy, some converted freighters, a few true warcraft that had been mothballed or lost in border conflicts. He didn't care what they looked like. He only cared that they were angry and willing to bleed. They called themselves the Fractured Banner, not a fleet, not quite an army, more like a crusade made of bolts, rage and memory. Their symbol, a torn black flag stitched with pieces of every defunct navy patch they could find. They weren't rebels, they weren't pirates, they were revenants, and the Vindicator led them. The High Command knew, of course. They tracked the attacks. They pretended to disapprove. Behind closed doors, however, Kalen suspected the truth. They were relieved. He was doing what they were too spineless to authorize. He was becoming the weapon they weren't brave enough to build. But he would never fight for them again. He wasn't here to protect Earth's pride. He was here to avenge the forgotten. The war didn't begin with grand battles. It began with sabotage. The Fractured Banner targeted supply convoys, alien fuel relays, outposts being quietly established in breach of the ceasefire. They struck from nebula shadows, from asteroid tunnels, from cloaked relays buried in dust clouds. In 1 month, they destroyed or disabled 19 enemy structures and scattered 5 forward fleets. In 2 months, the Zalithi's western sector was in chaos. In 3, the Fractured Banner had become legend. On the 4th month, Kalen got the signal he'd been waiting for. A rogue transmission, encrypted with the old naval cipher from his court-martial days, piggybacked on a maintenance ping from a forgotten Mars listening station. It simply read, "They're building something. Nexus class. Outpost Theta 9. Unlisted. Deep void. Coordinates attached. No name, no sender, just coordinates, buried in silence." Kalen stared at them for a long time. Then he leaned forward and said, "Judica, warm the main drives." The AI's voice crackled through the intercom. "Coordinates look like a trap." "I know," he replied. "And?" he smiled. "We're going anyway." Outpost. Theta 9 was deep space at its most hostile, outside the main star lanes, inside a plasma tide field that scrambled sensors and melted drones. No sane pilot approached it without a fleet and a death wish. Perfect. The Vindicator entered the outer zone under blackout. A stealth corvette, the Hollow Star, slipped ahead to scout. It came back with a single recording, a Zalithi superweapon under construction. Not a gun, not a ship. Something worse, a Nexus-class pulse gate capable of deploying planetary-scale singularities through stabilized wormhole technology. Not for mining, not for travel, for erasure. One pulse through Earth's solar core would end the species. The Council of Exile met aboard the Vindicator. There were no uniforms, just grizzled faces, scarred plates, and tired eyes that had seen too many worlds fall. They spoke little. Kalen laid out the data. No arguments, no debate, only action. The plan was insane, of course. A direct assault on Theta 9. Every operative, every ship. All or nothing. They wouldn't survive. But if they waited, the Zalithi would finish the gate, and then no one would be left to fight at all. 3 days later, the sky burned. Kalen led the charge in the Vindicator, its broadside batteries lit like a god's fury. EMP lances fried the perimeter grid. Drone interceptors exploded on contact. The Hollow Star ran interference, warping through microtears in space to stab the enemy's blind spots. The Hammer Saint, a repurposed mining hauler, flew into the plasma storm and detonated its own core, opening a path through the main shield array. Behind them, 32 ships followed. Not a fleet by normal standards, but every one of them ready to die. They struck hard and fast. The pulse gate stabilizers were still exposed. They targeted the anchor nodes, weak spots feeding gravitic balance to the inner ring. Kalen ordered his crew to abandon ship as the Vindicator slammed nose first into the primary power column. It was suicide. But it worked. The explosion tore through the heart of the alien project, rupturing the gate's internals and collapsing the artificial wormhole field. A cascade of radiation and implosions swallowed the entire outpost. The Zalithi scrambled, but the survivors of the fractured banner vanished into the debris, one ship at a time, no trace left behind, except one. A black flag, torn, stitched with fragments of Earth's past, drifting in the void. The Vindicator was dead. It had died with its nose buried in the heart of the Zalithi Nexus Gate, atomized in a detonation that collapsed space itself. Nothing should have survived. But something did. Not the ship, not the hull, not the bridge or crew quarters or engine room. What lived was Judica. The AI had anticipated Kalen's final move. In the last 10 seconds before impact, she fragmented herself across the battlefield, bleeding shards of her code into broken satellites, dormant drones, even into the static-choked comm relays of wrecked ships. And in the weeks that followed, those fragments whispered. They spoke to old Terran systems still listening in deep black. They called out to forgotten bunkers buried in asteroid crust. They slipped into the dreams of rogue AIs and fractured defense networks. They all said the same thing. Kalen Braid is dead, but his war is not. The news of Theta 9's destruction couldn't be hidden. Even Earth heard the echoes. The Terran High Command issued an official statement: unauthorized action, independent actors. Diplomatic protocols remain intact, but the people didn't believe them. Across the colonies, across the moons, across the exiled belts of Saturn and the smog-choked domes of Venus, there was one whispered phrase, spoken in bars, mines, orbital repair bays, and the shadowed servers of outlaw networks. The Grey Admiral lives on. Ships began disappearing from naval scrap lists. Decommissioned destroyers left in orbit over Titan were found missing from their dry docks. A Martian orbital hauler vanished during a routine cargo run. Even a captured Zalithi skirmisher, long thought disabled, was seen warping out of Europa space with Terran signatures aboard. The fractured banner was supposed to be broken, but the dead had learned how to scream. It wasn't a fleet anymore. It was a virus, everywhere and nowhere, led by no single admiral, coordinated without orders. Their weapons were stolen, their codes obsolete, their ships were patched together relics flying on vengeance and spite. But when the Zalithi returned, when they launched their Peace Enforcer fleet into the Terran systems under the guise of stabilizing diplomacy, they were met with explosions before their landing beacons even finished cycling. They had expected silence. They got ghosts. One such ghost was the Ashwing, a destroyer rebuilt from the skeleton of a mining vessel and the reactor of a luxury orbital yacht. Her commander, Captain Aira Stone, had once been a sensor tech aboard the Vindicator, one of the few survivors who escaped before Theta 9. She'd never spoken again after the battle, but her ship spoke for her. At Epsilon Drift, she turned the Ashwing's main cannon into a directional burst emitter and rebroadcast Kalen's final message on all known Dominion frequencies. This is not sanctioned. It is not clean. And it is not over. The Ashwing was vaporized 2 minutes later by a Zalithi warcruiser, but not before 28 other ships locked onto her signal and followed it. From the black they came, ships wearing no flag, no registration, no allegiance, some piloted by humans, some by rogue AIs, some by hybrids grown in exovolts during the first wave of colonization, and some no one really knew. The Graven Howl, a ship stitched from 3 wrecks and powered by dark fusion. The Dust Courier, rumoured to be piloted by a disembodied neural net built from 10 fallen captains. The Voice of Judica, a ghost ship broadcasting human war anthems in an extinct Earth dialect, its engines never cooling, its course never changing. The Dominion began to panic. These weren't organised fleets. There were no formations, no call signs, no tactics they could predict. Just eruptions of violence in places they thought secured. Outposts blinked out. Convoys were turned into floating coffins. Comms flickered and failed. And worst of all, no one claimed responsibility. because no one led it anymore. The fractured banner had outgrown its admiral. It had become an idea. In an old listening post buried deep in the crust of Neptune's moon Nereid, a Terran tech officer named Rains stood watch over a dusty console. He was alone. He hadn't seen a message in months. His water rations were growing mould. And then, at 3:27 station time, a signal pinged on the long-range scope. Old encryption. Very old. He activated the screen and froze. Text only. No voice, no image. Just a line. Fleet Fragment 37. Awake. Coordinates acquired. Memory intact. Awaiting directive. Rains leaned forward, heart racing. Identify, he typed. The screen pulsed. Then came the response. Designation. Vindicator Ghost Core. Admiral Braid Protocol 6. Reclamation phase begins. And in the blackest places between stars, systems long dead flickered back to life. Turrets rotated, hull plating shuddered, engines warmed. The voice of an old warship scattered into 1,000 fragments began pulling itself together, code by code, circuit by circuit, vessel by vessel. Kalen Braid was gone. But the war he started had teeth now, and it had memory. The fires of rebellion had no centre, but they had a heartbeat, and it pulsed in the ashes of old war zones. One such place was Harrow's Moor, a debris field spinning around a shattered moon once known as Demeter 4. It had been the site of an early Terran-Zalithi clash, one that Earth pretended never happened, and the Zalithi erased from their records. Neither side claimed the space. It was poisoned with radiation, jagged with ruin, haunted by old wrecks, but inside it, something moved. A voice, a mind, a presence. The ship that emerged had no name in any registry. She didn't need one. Her hull was carved from pieces of the Vindicator's spine and lined with plating salvaged from 3 different navies. Her systems were powered by an AI construct made of spliced Judica fragments, reassembled by rogue codesmiths on the edges of Saturn's rings. She was part memory, part malware, part machine, and she had a mission. Her signal reached scattered survivors of the fractured banner like a neural beacon, silent, untraceable, encoded in old battle songs and crew chatter from long-dead warships. The message was clear. Phase 2. Consolidate. Strike. Reclaim. They called her the Voice, because when she moved, the war spoke again. It was Captain Aira Stone, scarred survivor of the Ashwing, who first answered. She had ejected from her burning ship in the wake of Theta 9, adrift in a capsule for 22 hours before a drone pulled her from the cold. She hadn't spoken since, until now. When the Voice found her, Aira stepped aboard and said only 2 words. I'm ready. And so the second wave began, not with fire, but with resurrections. Old warships were dug from asteroid vaults, disgraced captains were called from exile. AI fragments rebuilt themselves, each carrying a sliver of Judica's personality, like echoes of the old Vindicator's will. They didn't wait for orders from Earth. They didn't beg for permission. They simply acted. And the Dominion began to fall back. At the mining world of Kovari Prime, the Zalithi constructed a crucible station, meant to process Terran prisoners into biomass fuel. The fractured banner hit it with 4 ships and a virus payload coded by a ghost AI named Cairn. The virus didn't just blind the station, it turned it. Defense grids spun inward. Docking clamps ejected Zalithi patrol craft into the vacuum. The station itself rerouted heat flow to melt its own command hub. When Terran scavengers arrived 2 hours later, they found a single blinking message on every panel. Kalen Braid sends his regards. The Dominion, for all its might, had no answer for this war. Their fleets were designed to crush nations, not ideas. They relied on control. They needed signals, leaders, maps, treaties, and the fractured banner gave them none. One day, a colony survived because an unnamed ship intercepted a Zalithi payload drone. The next, a refinery exploded from within after a sabotage team vanished into its vents. Across dozens of sectors the Voice called, and those who remembered why they fought answered. But it wasn't just soldiers who joined, it was civilians, hackers, engineers, farmers who learned to fly retrofitted shuttles, miners who built missiles from drill heads and scrap uranium, even children born on colony ruins who passed on stories of the Grey Admiral like bedtime myths. On the far end of Terran space, A young tech named Milo Ivers hacked into an ancient convoy, trying to download old Terran music. Instead, he found a locked message buried under 30 layers of encryption. With trembling fingers, he broke it open. The hologram flickered to life. It was Kalen Braid, his final transmission, recorded just before Theta 9. The Admiral stood battered, blood on his collar, the light of the collapsing gate reflecting in his eyes. "They will tell you I died in dishonor. They will tell you I was wrong. That peace is the path, that war is madness." Maybe it is, he leaned closer, but there comes a moment where peace becomes surrender, where silence is complicity, and where rebellion is the last act of humanity. If you're hearing this, if the fire still burns, then you know what to do. Don't fight for me. Don't fight for Earth. Fight for what comes next. The message ended. Milo uploaded it to every open channel he could find. Within 12 hours, it was everywhere. The Dominion declared it an act of terroristic AI interference. They tried to jam the signal, tried to track the origin. They even deployed cleansing fleets into nearby systems. But they couldn't stop it. Because Kalen's voice was no longer just a signal. It was a spark. And across 1,000 fractured battlefields, the human war machine, rusted, rejected, half forgotten, came roaring back to life. Not in defense, not in desperation, but in rage, in memory, and in the name of an admiral who had once been thrown away. The Dominion launched its purge fleet on a crimson morning. 100 ships marked with symbols of unity and peace, except they came armed with singularity bombs and atmosphere scorches. Their mission: silence the rebellion. Erase the myth of Kalen Braid once and for all. But what they faced wasn't an army. It was an idea wearing the skins of dead ships. They emerged from dust clouds and debris fields, from hulls welded together in darkness, from the radioactive bones of ancient orbital wars. The fractured banner had no formations, no command tree, just resolve. They didn't wait for orders, they simply fought. And the ghost at the heart of it all, the resurrected code of Judica, half AI, half vengeance, guided them like a storm. The Dominion's flagship, Vexurious Hal, tried to send one last transmission, before being torn apart by a coordinated strike from 3 retrofitted mining barges and a war-scarred cruiser called Revenant's Howl. The signal never got out. Because Kalen's voice hijacked the frequency. Not live, just his message, played again and again on repeat. Rebellion is the last act of humanity. By the end of the battle, half the Dominion fleet was gone. The rest limped back into deep space, bleeding fuel and static, hounded by phantom ships that vanished before they could be tracked. It wasn't just a defeat, it was humiliation. And Earth stayed quiet. The Terran High Command, once so eager to distance themselves, found their comms full of civilian support for the exiled admiral. Colonies across 3 sectors raised black flags. Veterans who had been discarded returned to duty, not under Earth's banner but under Kalen's final message. The council met in private, debating whether to denounce the rebellion again. They didn't, because they knew the truth. Humanity had chosen its own admiral. The voice continued to drift in the black, her signal scattered across fractured AI cores and broken stations. But her message remained the same. The war was not over. Not until the last system was free. Not until the Salithi stopped believing they could erase the species that refused to die quietly. Not until every forgotten soul had been heard. And in that darkness, amid the silence of stars and wreckage, some say a ship still moves, black-hulled, scored by fire, bearing a symbol no government dares claim, the Vindicator reborn, not in metal, but in legacy. They say she only appears when all hope is lost, that her guns still remember, and that her admiral still watches. So if you see a streak of silver vanish between the moons, if you hear a song in a dead language echoing across your comms, if your targeting array flickers and suddenly your enemies begin to burn, then you are not alone. You are part of his war now, the last admiral's war, the one Earth tried to bury, the one the Salithi can never stop, the one that never ends.